For centuries, African gods have been venerated as powerful forces of nature, guiding lives, protecting communities, and embodying wisdom. These deities, deeply rooted in the natural world, were seen as both protectors and providers, keeping harmony between humanity and the cosmos. From the thunderous roar of Shango to the nurturing embrace of Oshun, these gods shaped not only the spiritual lives of African communities, but also their social, political, and cultural frameworks. Yet today, in an increasingly globalized world, these ancient gods find themselves pushed into the background. The question arises, have they been forgotten or lost in the shadows of modern religions? Are African gods immortal, or are they at risk of fading away? What happens when ancient spiritual systems collide with the rise of monotheistic faiths and Western ideals? For centuries, the spread of Christianity and Islam across the African continent has brought new gods, new rituals, and new beliefs. The indigenous pantheons that once flourished now face an uphill battle to stay relevant. Many people in Africa, particularly among younger generations, are drawn to the promises of salvation, personal success, and community found in these dominant religions. But what about the gods that existed long before these foreign influences? Can African deities still resonate with the modern world? Can they survive in an age of secularism where even belief itself is questioned? And more importantly, can these gods reclaim their rightful place in the hearts and minds of the people they once guided? This video will explore the battle to preserve these timeless beings in the modern world, asking whether African gods are fading into the past or experiencing a resurgence. We will delve into the rich spiritual history of Africa, examining how these gods were woven into the very fabric of life and how the rise of Christianity, Islam, and secularism has challenged their relevance today. Is there hope for their immortality, or are they destined to remain a memory of a bygone era? Let's explore this ongoing journey and the struggle to keep these ancient deities alive in a world that has changed so much. Across the African continent, a vast and diverse range of spiritual beliefs centers on a rich pantheon of gods and goddesses, each embodying unique aspects of nature, community, and the cosmos. These gods, revered by millions, are not just distant, abstract figures, but integral forces within the lives of those who honor them. Well-known African deities like Ogun, the god of iron and war, Shango, the thunderous king of justice, Oshun, the goddess of love and fertility, Anansi, the wise and trickster spider, Mbombo, the creator god in the Congo, and Niami, the supreme god of the Akan people. Each played distinct yet interwoven roles in the spiritual and everyday lives of African societies. Their stories are deeply intertwined with the natural world, symbolizing the diverse forces that govern life on Earth. At the heart of African spirituality is a cosmology where the gods are seen as manifestations of natural forces, rivers, storms, fire, and earth. African spiritual systems view the universe as interconnected, where the spiritual world and the physical world are inseparable. Gods are not separate from nature, but are its personification. The river goddess Oshun, for example, represents not just water, but its life-giving properties, nurturing people and ecosystems alike. Similarly, Shango's thunder is a powerful force of creation and destruction, embodying the duality of life itself. Fire, too, is more than a destructive element. It's the spark of transformation and renewal, as symbolized by Ogun's mastery over metal and tools. In this view, nature is not just a backdrop for life, it is the sacred canvas on which divine energy flows, shaping and reshaping existence. Integral to African spirituality is the veneration of ancestors. Ancestor worship is central to understanding the relationship between the living and the spiritual world. Ancestors are not seen as distant, unreachable figures, but as active participants in the lives of their descendants. They are believed to hold wisdom, guidance, and the power to influence events in the physical world. This connection is not limited to the past but extends into the present, where rituals and offerings are made to honor the ancestors, ensuring their continued support. The living are seen as custodians of their ancestral legacy, and their actions in this world are guided by the wisdom and blessings of those who came before. Ancestor worship emphasizes continuity and connection, ensuring that the spiritual guidance of past generations remains ever-present and influential. These gods and spiritual practices were not abstract or relegated to sacred temples. They were deeply integrated into daily life. From the morning greetings to the evening prayers, the divine was present in every moment. Rituals and offerings were performed to honor the gods, seek blessings, and maintain harmony with the natural world. In many African communities, rituals involving food, dance, and music were common ways of connecting with the divine. Health and healing were also tied to spiritual practices, with traditional healers serving as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Leadership was often seen as divinely ordained, with rulers regarded as the physical embodiment of the god's will. Kings and chiefs were expected to maintain a connection with the divine, upholding the balance between humanity, the gods, and nature. These practices shaped the social structures of African societies, creating communities where spiritual beliefs and practices were foundational to governance, health, and daily interactions. In African cosmology, the gods were also tied to justice and morality. Deities like Shango were revered as upholders of justice, ensuring that moral order was maintained within the community. Their presence wasn't just ceremonial, it was practical. People believed that living in accordance with divine laws would bring prosperity and protection, while defiance could bring misfortune or punishment. African spiritual systems promoted the idea that the gods were not distant beings but active forces in daily life, shaping the actions of individuals and communities. This emphasis on divine justice and morality made the gods not only spiritual entities but also moral guides for society, influencing everything from interpersonal relationships to community governance. Through these beliefs, African gods shaped the very fabric of social life. Spiritual practices dictated not only religious ceremonies, but also the moral code of society, its political structures, and its approach to health and healing. The gods provided not just spiritual support, but also a blueprint for how to live harmoniously within the world. Their power was seen as a force that could be tapped into through rituals and devotion, ensuring prosperity, balance, and social order. Even today, the enduring legacy of these gods can be seen in the continued practice of traditional African spirituality, which remains a living. The arrival of Christianity and Islam in Africa, brought by European colonization, marked a profound shift in the continent's spiritual landscape. As European powers spread across Africa, they not only sought to conquer territories, but also to impose their religious ideologies. Christianity in particular was presented as a civilizing force, often intertwined with colonial rule, which sought to replace indigenous African spiritual systems with Western religious values. Missionaries established schools and churches encouraging Africans to abandon their traditional gods in favor of the Christian God. Islam, arriving earlier through trade and conquest, also spread through regions like North Africa and parts of West Africa, bringing its own monotheistic framework to replace the pantheistic beliefs of indigenous religions. Both religions were introduced alongside political domination, where the colonizers not only sought to control the land but also to reshape the spiritual and cultural identities of African peoples. As European colonization advanced, traditional African deities were increasingly demonized and suppressed, often labeled as pagan or primitive by the missionaries and colonial authorities. The gods that once embodied power, protection, and wisdom were now portrayed as false idols. Rituals, offerings, and ancestor worship were not just seen as outdated customs, but as sinful practices that needed to be eradicated for Africans to be truly civilized. The colonizers' focus on converting the heathen Africans was driven by a desire to align the continent with European ideals of religion, morality, and governance. Traditional religious practices were outlawed in many areas, and those who clung to their beliefs faced harsh punishment. The sacred sites that were once central to the worship of African gods were abandoned, destroyed, or repurposed for churches and mosques, symbolizing the physical and cultural erasure of the old ways. Along with religious conversion came a more insidious shift in cultural identity. As Africans began to adopt Christianity and Islam, they increasingly aligned themselves with Western values, further distancing themselves from their ancestral roots. European ideas of civilization, progress, and modernity were seen as superior, and many Africans began to view their traditional practices and gods with shame or indifference. In the eyes of colonizers and those influenced by their ideals, African spirituality was relegated to the past, something backward and unworthy of preservation. This cultural and identity shift resulted in the gradual loss of many traditional practices and rituals, as younger generations grew up without the connection to the ancestral gods that had once been so central to their communities. Instead of venerating deities like Ogun, Shango, and Oshun, many turned to the new religions, embracing a sense of belonging to a larger global religious community, while losing touch with the spiritual traditions of their forebears. In recent decades, the rise of secularism has further complicated the preservation of African gods and traditional beliefs. As modernity and globalization have taken hold, younger generations, particularly in urban areas, have increasingly distanced themselves from both traditional African spirituality and organized religion. Secular ideologies, along with the allure of Western consumerism and a more individualistic worldview, have led many to question the relevance of spirituality in an age dominated by technology and materialism. For these young people, ancestral worship and traditional rituals may seem like relics of a bygone era with little connection to the modern world. As a result, secularism has created a cultural divide where the spiritual needs of the older generations, who continue to revere the gods of the past, clash with the more rational, science-driven perspectives of the younger ones. This generational divide poses a significant challenge for the survival of African spiritual practices, as the connection to the gods grows weaker with each passing year. The rise of secularism, combined with the enduring dominance of monotheistic religions, leaves African deities struggling for relevance in a society that is increasingly focused on the secular and the material. In the 21st century, a renewed interest in African spirituality is sweeping across the continent and the African diaspora. After centuries of colonial repression and the rise of monotheistic religions, many people of African descent are beginning to reclaim their spiritual heritage, reconnecting with their ancestral roots. This African spiritual renaissance is not just a return to old traditions, but a vibrant reimagining of them in a modern context. Across cities and rural areas alike, people are turning back to the gods and goddesses of Africa, rediscovering the rituals, practices, and beliefs that were once the foundation of their communities. This spiritual revival is fueled by a desire to affirm one's cultural identity, to reject colonial narratives, and to recover a sense of spiritual power that had been suppressed for generations. Afrocentrism and Pan-Africanism have played pivotal roles in this resurgence. These movements, which gained momentum in the mid-20th century, have fostered a renewed sense of pride and solidarity among people of African descent worldwide. By emphasizing the beauty, strength, and wisdom of African cultures, Afrocentrism encourages Africans to look inward, reclaiming their heritage and celebrating the diverse spiritual traditions that have shaped the continent. Pan-Africanism, with its call for unity among all people of African descent, has also contributed to the revitalization of African spirituality. As young Africans increasingly reconnect with their heritage, they are finding that the gods of their ancestors still have a powerful role to play in their lives. This shift has sparked a spiritual awakening, particularly among younger generations who see the reclamation of African traditions as a way to assert their identity and resist the lasting impact of colonialism. This cultural revival is evident in the growing number of African spiritual festivals, dances, and rituals that have become central to contemporary life. Across Africa, traditional deities are being celebrated in new and exciting ways, blending ancient practices with modern artistic expressions. Festivals celebrating gods like Shango, Oshun, and Ogun are now vibrant celebrations of culture and spirituality, with music, dance, and rituals that honor the divine while affirming African pride. These events serve not only as a way to connect with the divine, but also as a form of resistance to the dominance of foreign religions. The arts play a crucial role in this spiritual renaissance, with musicians, dancers, and visual artists creating works that honor the gods and celebrate African cosmology. Sacred sites that were once abandoned or desecrated are being revived as people seek to reconnect with the physical spaces where their ancestors once worshipped. These cultural events are not just celebrations, they are statements of identity, resistance, and empowerment. The resurgence of African spirituality is also being propelled by modern-day practitioners who are helping to keep these deities alive. Traditional healers, spiritual leaders, and practitioners of African religions are playing an essential role in this movement. Figures like Malidoma Somme, a renowned African spiritual teacher and healer, and Baba Ifa Karade, a prominent figure in African spirituality in the diaspora, are helping to bridge the gap between traditional African spirituality and the modern world. These practitioners not only offer spiritual guidance, but also create spaces for African deities to remain relevant in contemporary life. Their work is pivotal in passing down ancient knowledge, ensuring that these gods continue to be honored and respected in the 21st century. As the interest in African spirituality continues to grow, these leaders are fostering a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness between African spirituality and the everyday lives of modern Africans, ensuring that the gods of the past are firmly rooted in the present. In the digital age, technology has become a powerful tool in the revival and spread of African spirituality. Platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and podcasts have opened up new channels for sharing knowledge about African gods and traditions. These platforms allow practitioners, spiritual leaders, and scholars to reach a global audience, offering a wealth of information that was once confined to local communities or hidden from the public eye. Through social media, videos, articles, and podcasts, African deities and their associated practices are being shared, discussed, and celebrated by people around the world. The accessibility of these platforms has helped bridge the gap between traditional African spirituality and modern global audiences, making it easier for people from all walks of life to learn about the gods, rituals, and cosmology of the continent. The African diaspora has also played a significant role in this digital renaissance. Communities in the United States, the UK, and the Caribbean are increasingly embracing African spiritual practices, seeing them as a way to reconnect with their roots and reclaim their cultural heritage. In these diasporic communities, African deities have become symbols of pride, resilience, and identity. Online platforms have allowed people of African descent to come together, share their experiences, and discuss the spiritual practices that were passed down through generations of their ancestors. The digital space has enabled these communities to form connections with their African heritage that may have been lost or diluted due to colonialism and the spread of Western religions. Through hashtags, online groups, and YouTube channels dedicated to African spirituality, These deities are now more visible and celebrated than ever before. African gods are also making their way into popular culture, further raising awareness of these ancient deities among younger generations. Films, books, music videos, and even video games are incorporating African mythology and spiritual themes, bringing the gods to the forefront of modern entertainment. Movies like Black Panther, which prominently featured deities from African spiritual traditions, introduced millions to gods like Bast and Shango in an accessible and engaging way. Similarly, artists like Beyoncé and Rihanna have used African symbolism in their music videos, paying homage to African spirituality and its rich visual culture. This crossover into pop culture has sparked a newfound curiosity about African gods, making them relevant in ways that resonate with today's youth. The rise of these cultural representations is helping to revive interest in African spirituality, offering new generations a chance to explore these ancient traditions in a contemporary context. The battle for relevance between traditional African gods and modern religions is deeply felt in today's Africa, where Christianity and Islam dominate much of the cultural and spiritual landscape. The tension is palpable for individuals who seek to honor deities like Shango or Oshun, while living in societies shaped by the doctrines of monotheistic faiths. In many African countries, Christianity and Islam not only hold spiritual sway, but also dictate social norms, from marriage practices to governance. To openly embrace African gods, especially in public spaces, is often seen as controversial or even subversive. In the private sphere, however, many Africans continue to revere their traditional gods, blending practices from both their ancestral faiths and the newer religions. This intersection creates a complex spiritual environment where African spirituality is often relegated to the margins but remains an essential part of personal and cultural identity for many. Choosing to embrace African gods in predominantly Christian or Muslim societies carries significant psychological, cultural, and political implications. In some cases, followers of African deities may be viewed with suspicion, labeled as pagan or backward, terms historically used by missionaries to stigmatize indigenous beliefs. This stigma can create an internal conflict as individuals navigate between a desire to honor their ancestral traditions and the pressure to conform to the religious majority. The psychological toll of this conflict can be profound, as individuals grapple with feelings of alienation or fear of persecution. Politically, the widespread influence of Christianity and Islam has sometimes led to the erasure or marginalization of African spiritual systems, further complicating the process of reclaiming and practicing traditional beliefs. Yet there is also a growing movement of resistance as more people, particularly younger generations, actively seek to reclaim African spirituality as a form of cultural pride and defiance against centuries of colonial and religious dominance. Globalization and the homogenization of culture present additional challenges for African gods. In an increasingly globalized world where Western cultural products and ideologies dominate the media and entertainment industries, African gods risk being relegated to niche spiritual circles, disconnected from the larger cultural conversation. The influence of global capitalism, consumerism, and social media often emphasizes individualism and secularism, undermining collective spiritual practices that are deeply embedded in African traditional systems. Globalization can erode local customs, making it harder for traditional spiritual practices to thrive in the face of universal trends. However, there is also a counter trend where African spiritual practices are finding new expressions in urban centers and in the digital space, showing resilience against the forces of cultural homogenization. The question of whether African deities need to evolve to remain relevant in the modern world is one that continues to spark debate. Some argue that these gods must adapt incorporating modern ideas and technologies to stay connected to younger generations who are often more attuned to global trends than to ancestral traditions. This could involve reinterpreting ancient practices in ways that resonate with contemporary values or even merging them with new spiritual movements. Others maintain that the timeless nature of African gods is part of their strength. These deities represent universal principles, justice, love, creation, and balance that are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The essence of these gods lies not in their ability to adapt to modern culture, but in their spiritual integrity, which transcends time and remains relevant because they reflect fundamental aspects of the human experience. Whether they evolve or remain steadfast in their ancient forms, the power of African gods lies in the ability to connect individuals to something deeper, something rooted in the past, yet timeless in its relevance. The question of whether African gods can survive in the modern world is not just one of spiritual survival, but of cultural continuity. As Africa continues to grapple with the legacy of colonialism, the rise of monotheistic religions, and the pressures of globalization, the battle for relevance is ongoing. Yet, despite the challenges, African gods have not disappeared. They remain deeply embedded in the spiritual fabric of the continent and the African diaspora. In fact, they are experiencing a resurgence through movements like Afrocentrism, the revitalization of cultural festivals, and the power of social media. What is clear is that African spirituality is not a relic of the past. It is alive, evolving, and adapting to the modern world. The gods of Africa are not static. They live in the hearts and practices of those who continue to honor them, whether through ritual, art, or digital media. For many, these deities are not just ancient symbols. They are living forces that continue to shape identity, culture, and community. Whether African gods need to evolve or simply be remembered in their original form, their relevance today lies in their ability to speak to universal truths about human existence. They embody connection to the land, to ancestors, and to the divine. They offer a spiritual refuge in a world that is increasingly disconnected from deeper, more meaningful practices. Ultimately, the immortality of African gods will depend not on their ability to fit into the modern world, but on their ability to remain true to their essence, offering wisdom, healing, and guidance to those who seek them. As long as people continue to honor these deities, they will remain not just relevant, but vital. So, the real question is not whether African gods can survive in the modern world, but whether the modern world can remember the wisdom they offer. As long as there are people willing to listen, these gods will continue to thrive.